Guys, so in this video I wanted to kind of present more of an educational piece of a common question that I get, which is how do you program for more of a hypertrophy or a volume focused block further away from competition versus more of a strength focused block approaching competition in the case of powerlifting. And I think this is a really great question because there's lots of different lines of thinking around how to do this, and I want to make it very clear that there's not just one way to program. However, I do think it is important for coaches to have sorts of systems that they use and philosophies that they do apply to their lifters that kind of provides a conceptual framework for how and why they make programming decisions. I think that's something that's very important and not talked about as much. And I wanted to be kind of transparent with sort of my methods and thoughts behind programming for powerlifters, say we're further away from competition, and then approaching competition, say we're peaking for competition, or where things are just going to get a little bit more specific. So I want to present to you guys this whole concept called MRV. So MRV is basically coined by Dr. Mike Isertel, and it's basically an acronym for maximum recoverable volume. And the whole theory behind it is that we all have a maximum amount of volume that we can recover from and adapt to. And if we train above that, we're not going to be getting any better. We probably are actually going to be getting worse. If we train at our MRV, we're probably going to be, having the maximum amount of gains that we possibly can get during a training cycle. Now, we don't want to always be training at MRV or close to MRV, because the issue with doing that while the gains are maximal, we are probably going to have very short-term ability to actually adapt and recover to that, just because fatigue will probably rise a little bit faster than it was if we were to be more on our maximum adaptive volumes, which is a little bit more of a range. Basically, maximum adaptive volumes are also coined by Dr. Mike Isertel, and it's basically the certain range where you basically can adapt to really well. To illustrate this example, think about volume as a bell-shaped curve. I'm going to look this up actually right now, just so I can kind of just show it. Just kind of to illustrate kind of how volume kind of works. So let's say that on this, let's say that everything going up to your maximum recoverable volume, say that this middle point is maximum recoverable volume in terms of volume. You're going to be getting the maximum return on investment. If we go beyond that, we can still make some gains, but we're going to have diminishing returns and not as much as if we were training more on this side of the bell curve. We're going to probably have disproportionately more fatigue on this side relative to the stimulus, and it's just we're going to be doing a little bit too much relative to our recovery capacity. Now, there might be some times strategically where I will push a lifter towards this point if we're peaking to maybe have a super compensation effect. But that's a little bit less clear cut and dry. There's a little bit more risk that is coming with that. And I prefer not to do that. I usually will, if I'm peaking somebody, will want to push them towards this before I start to see some sort of recovery decline. And then at that point, I'll start a taper with volume. However, going back to basically I was saying with the maximum adaptive volumes are probably around this range where we're getting a really good stimulus and we are maximizing our gains, but we're not being so close to our MRV where we're going to have more of an issues of burnout, injury, overuse injuries, and just not being able to recover and adapt very consistently throughout the block. The most important thing in training is kind of the ability to recover and adapt consistently, and being in maximum adaptive volumes are pretty good. And so with the literature, usually it says anywhere between 10 to 20 sets per week is what most lifters can recover from and adapt to. And it's kind of individual. It does depend a lot on the person, fiber type, male or female, ranges of motion, what exercises that you're using to fill up that recovery bucket, etc. And that's just something you're going to have to learn with over time, and something that I keep track of with my lifters. Where's the breaking points, quote unquote, and where do they recover and adapt from best to throughout a training block. Basically, I want to be able to find a volume dose where my lifters can consistently recover from and adapt to throughout their training block until around a deload week, or that fatigue is starting to get pretty high. Maybe they're emotional in a psychological drive to training is starting to dip. At that point, we'll probably deload, reduce that training fatigue, maybe while maintaining those fitness adaptations, and then be able to, come back into the next block and be able to resume strength. So hopefully that makes sense. If you guys want to learn a little bit more about that, I would recommend going to renaissanceperiodization.com to learn a little bit more about MRV, AV, all these recovery metrics, kind of like what they mean, how to use them. I'll link it down below in the description box below, and like another podcast kind of explaining it. But going into programming, in a hypertrophy block, I am going to program in a little bit more variation in exercises, and that's mainly because exercise variation is actually really, really important for having whole muscle fiber hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy of the muscles, because every single muscle is going to, or every single exercise is going to tax different parts of the muscle fiber differently. If you're just performing bench press, you probably get pretty good at overall hypertrophy, but if you want to maximize the best hypertrophy that you can get, having exercise variation in multiple planes of motion is probably going to be really, really good. So, maybe including some flies, some incline machine bench press, different grips, different planes of motion is probably going to be really, really good. And as well, so going off this maximum recoverable volume bucket, say our hypothetical lifter has about 18 sets a week that they can recover from on chest, which is about me. That's about my MRV. I'll probably put them a little bit below that, maybe 3 or 4 sets below that for their MAV, see how they respond to that. And I'll basically, with this whole entire volume bucket, say we have 15 sets to work with, I'm going to try to incorporate that with one while still having enough specificity of the competition lift. We still wanted to train that lift so we can get better at it. But because I'm not as worried about being peak for competition and being as practiced, and the goal is mainly volume accumulation and having variety in our training routines to take advantage of periodization of exercise specificity, and really get more specific as we go towards a meet, I'll incorporate some more exercise variation and probably a little bit more of a higher rep bias. So, top triple on bench press with 3x6 at minus 10% load. You'll notice that I push the back downs a little harder on volume phases than I do the top sets in more of a hypertrophy block relative to the top set intensity or the down set intensity. And then we're going to do some incline machine chest press at a higher intensity, higher volumes. Then close grip bench press, so still bench press, but it's going to be a little more of a variation. Still pushing those down sets a little bit harder relative to the top set. As a general rule of thumb, for every single rep that you go down, it's going to be about like 3% for each RPE point. So minus 10% load. I'm assuming they're going to do fatigue about, for every single set that somebody does, usually they'll fatigue about half in RPE on bench press. With squats and deadlifts, it's usually about half to 1 RPE. I found that to be the case with bench press. So, I'm going to be assuming that their starting weight on this is going to be, around a 6 RPE. And then as they accumulate fatigue, it'll probably end up around a 7 RPE or maybe 7.5, depending on their work capacity. And then I'll have, a third day of benching that's, an incline bench press, something completely different, kind of easier, but, kind of starting RPE at 5 RPE, and then telling them to repeat whatever load that they did there for 3 more sets, and kind of do that. So that's kind of some more exercise variety, getting lots of different planes of motion, and whatever. And kind of will also have a phase potentiating effect of once we do use specificity as a tool and we do start to, work in more lower rep ranges, maybe we're pushing top intensity more, we'll be able to, potentially have better strength gains once we do become more specific with our loading and rep ranges towards the 1 rep max. Now this is in contrast to a strength focused block, for example, where you can kind of see the difference here. So overall, there's a little bit more lower rep ranges. There's a little bit less of, there's a little bit more volume on the actual competition lift, less volume on variations. This is basically to take advantage of specificity, and to take advantage a little bit more of, the overall long-term periodization. We still have the same amount of chest sets here, but the volume slots are being filled up by more bench press. And I do use sets to calculate volume. I don't really pay attention to tonnage as much, although I do pay attention to it somewhat, which is why, I did a 5x4 instead of a 3x6. It's going to be similar in terms of tonnage overall and overall set reps done. But what this will basically do is have you, one, stay a little bit more healthy, make sure that you can, really peak your top end strength, you're going to have more practice with the competition lifts and have more directed adaptations towards the competition lift itself as you approach competition. So that's the biggest difference. That's the biggest difference that I personally have between, hypertrophy blocks and strength blocks in terms of powerlifting periodization. Now, whenever I'm choosing rep schemes and whatnot, the lifter responds best to, we're kind of going to find that over time. But I find a lot of that has a correlation between distance traveled by the lifter. So if you have really, really good leverages for a lift, generally I found that a little more of a higher up bias for those lifters tends to be a little bit best. If you have more normal leverages, more like the middle of the bell curve, basically, let's say you have really efficient leverages, maybe we'll do most of your volume work between the 6 to 10 rep range. And maybe if you have normal rep leverages, we'll do mostly between, the 3 to 6 rep range. And maybe if you have, bad leverages for lift, we'll do most of our training volume between, the 3 to 5 rep range. Like that's just hypothetical. A lot of it just depends upon, paying attention to the different trends. But I get a lot of questions about this, and this is just something I wanted to kind of elucidate for a lot of people, get some insight into my thought process behind programming, and I can apply this to basically every other competition lift. And I kind of am going to basically be aiming to find a dose and an overall set number and specificity towards the lifts I kind of will periodize over time. And I found this works really well for the lifters in the long run. We want to be able to use variation and use all these tools to our advantage. Being super specific year round is not necessary. We do not need to be peak for competition all the time. We do not need to, be super specific all the time. There are lots of benefits to varying your training from a physiological standpoint and a psychological standpoint. Constantly doing the same exercises over and over again. It can get kind of boring. It can get kind of boring, always having to push the top end intensity. Maybe, it makes more sense. It's more fun pushing your volume work a little bit more. Throwing in some chest flies when you haven't done them in a while after a prep. And if you know how to do this properly, you'll be able to still have just as good, if not better progress than if you were to be more specific year round. And this is honestly something that I've found in the long run just overall contributes to just better progress for lifters in practice. So that's the video. Hopefully you guys liked it. If you guys have any questions down below, just comments. If you guys want to see more sort of programming videos like this, let me know, and I'll be happy to give some more insight on my programming and thought process. But yeah, that's it. If you guys are interested in coaching or programs, just click the link down below to to apply for one. And then, like the video, subscribe, and follow me on Instagram, Adam D. Peeler. And yeah, talk to you guys in the next one. Bye.